The following interview is part of the Price of Freedom Oral History Series, sponsored by the Madison County Military Heritage Commission, informed the public of the sacrifices made by veterans in our community on battlefields around the world. Each veteran interviewed received a Valor Award for their heroism during combat and is a member of the Military Heritage Hall of Heroes. We wish to thank the Huntsville School System and the ETV Broadcast Center for their help in presenting this Military Heritage program. Hello everyone, I'm Tom Kennemer. Today we'd like to welcome U.S. Army veteran Bill Emerson. Bill retired as a lieutenant colonel after serving 20 years in the Army. He is the recipient of 2 Bronze Star medals with V device for his heroic action while serving 2 tours in Vietnam in 1967 and again in 1969. Bill also received 3 Purple Heart medals for wounds received while serving in combat. He was inducted into the Madison County Military Heritage Hall of Heroes in 1996. Bill, it's a pleasure to have you with us, sir. Thanks for your time.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here.
Good to have you. Bill, first of all, I want you to talk about, you're an Oklahoma native, but your dad, being in the military at that time, you actually grew up around the world, right?
Yes, because he kept moving. We'd move around a lot of different places, and including spent 3 years in Germany during the time of the Korean War, and that was shortly after World War II. Uh-huh. So we happened to be stationed in the French zone, which didn't get the Marshall Plan, so things were still quite rugged at that time. A lot of still bomb buildings and that sort of thing. Yeah. The schools were, American schools were finally put together, and we had some of that initially, but for a while we had to get on our bus every day and go across the Rhine River to the American zone where they had good schools and do some learning there. And since then, of course, I've served 2 other tours in Germany as on my own as a lieutenant and then as a major.
Kind of a world traveler.
Well, I get around a lot.
Bill, your dad lived through one of the worst ordeals in World War II, the Bataan Death March. Tell us about his experience.
He went over to the Philippines. He was sent to the Philippines as part of the second he was in the 2nd Division in Texas and was sent to the Philippines to be part of the Philippine Division, and he arrived there in 1940. Mm-hmm. And stayed there for several months. Later in 1941, in the spring of 41, they sent the dependents back, so my mother came back and she was pregnant with me, but he stayed over and served with the Philippine Division, which later was numbered the 12th Division. Mm-hmm. And then when Bataan surrendered, then he was on the Bataan Death March, which he survived, and then later was shipped to Japan, where he then completed the entire war. And it's just been in the last couple of years that I've been able to go over and visit where he actually was in camp.
Really?
And the cemetery where some of the American prisoners died, where they were kept. And interestingly enough, despite the attitude that the Japanese treated the prisoners very poorly, which they did. Mm-hmm. By chance, 2 years after the end of the war, a Japanese civilian felt so bad about the situation that he erected a monument with the names of the American prisoners who had died in prison camp. And it was very interesting to see that site because most Americans are not aware of that.
Yeah. It was I don't remember exactly how many started out on that march, but it only just a few hundred that made it through, right?
Yeah, it was a very, very small number that survived, but there were several, and of course, some of the soldiers were in better condition than others.
Right.
My father happened to be an infantry fellow,
right.
And then subsequent, he ended up spending 27 years in the Army before he retired and became a civilian and continued working in the Pentagon, where he had been for the last 2 years.
Was his health affected, though, afget that for the rest of his tour?
Some of it was. He still had some problems. He could get cold if he'd go to sleep at night, because he had slept for almost 4 years without any blankets. Mm-hmm. So if he'd just wake up, and if he was cold, he wouldn't normally wake up like most people would if he were cold.
Really? Yeah.
And the one thing that he did was when he was in camp, he learned to smoke because he hadn't smoked before. So then for several years, he continued smoking, so that affected his health. He finally was able to quit after several years.
Mm-hmm. Bill, what was it about the Army that made you want to make it your life as well?
When I was telling you about when we were in Germany, he was with the 2nd Armored Division, and I went to several of the times when they'd have displays out, and they'd invite the German public and any of the Americans who were there in Germany to get on the vehicles. And I just thought tanks were the way to go, and a lot better than infantry. So when it came time to receive a commission, I wanted to go into armor, be in tanks. I didn't have to worry about carrying my water. There was always a 5-gallon can on board and that sort of thing. So I thought that was the way to go. And
you got to ride. You got to ride too.
Oh,
right?
yeah. Yeah. And I found that very interesting, very nice way to live. And you could carry your sleeping bag in your vehicle, do all that sort of stuff. So I thought life was grand. Yeah.
We'll go back just a little bit, Bill. Your dad was one of your instructors during ROTC training, is that right?
No, he was an instructor. That's what he was doing after World War II, but
Okay.
I was still in grade school at the time. But when he was freed after the war, then he had a choice of assignments, and he'd been at what's now Oklahoma State University, then Oklahoma A&M. And he already had his master's degree, and he thought if he could go there and teach for 3 years, simultaneously, he could complete his doctorate, and he became a doctor of entomology, study of insects. And so that's why he liked that. So it's very interesting that in 3 years he taught full-time and also got a doctorate degree.
But I'm sure he taught you a lot about that sort of thing. Yeah, ROTC. I'm sure he passed along what he could.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, you were a distinguished military graduate from Oklahoma State. Did you go into the Army immediately after you graduated?
Yes, I went in when I graduated and did that. My first troop assignment was in Germany with the tank battalion. And that was my only experience in a tank battalion because although I was in the armor, subsequently I was always with cavalry units, which are mechanized now. And some people have a hard time with that. I was at a doctor's appointment recently, and one of the nurses saw that I had on a shirt that had the 11th Cavalry mentioned on it with crossed sabers. And she says, "Oh, you must ride horses." And I said, "Well, the only reason I know how to ride a horse is because I'm from Oklahoma."
You're a true cowboy, right?
Yeah.
Well, also now, one of the things you did, I think, after that, or maybe involving along the same time, was you went to airborne school, right? Was that?
Yes. When I first joined the Army, that was really before I got an assignment. As I went to Fort Benning and went through airborne school, which I thought was interesting. It was great to do that.
What was it like jumping out of a perfectly safe aircraft, Bill? I mean, the first time especially.
Well, before you jump the first time, you do a lot of what they call ground school.
Yeah.
So you're jumping off of a 34 or 37-foot tower and jumping with that. And so you got very used to the harness pulling you and that sort of thing. Yeah. So I thought it was not bad at all first time I went out. What was interesting is there was another lieutenant who was right behind me. And when we both landed on the ground, he said, "Did you hear it?" And I said, "Hear what?" He says, "You could hear the little rubber bands popping off." So he was a little calmer than I was the first time, but I survived and got down there, so it was fine.
I bet your heart was racing when first time you actually jumped out of the plane.
Yeah, but you don't have a choice, you just do it.
How many jumps have you made through the year?
Oh, just there at school, and then my only airborne assignment was in Vietnam for a short time. I was with the Pathfinder detachment. And then after that, when I was, at that time, I was a first lieutenant. And then when I became a captain, then I transferred out to an infantry company. because no need for people doing what I was doing over there. Although in my second tour, I was heavily in the 11th Cav with armor, but
Right.
spent most of my time doing infantry work. So I commanded a rifle company for half a year.
Yeah. Now, you volunteered for duty in Vietnam, and it didn't take long for you to wind up in country, right?
That's right. Yeah, I moved from Germany, from the Tank Battalion, over to Vietnam, and took my wife back with me, of course, and she stayed there with my parents while I was in Vietnam for that first tour.
Mm-hmm. What was your first impression when you got to Vietnam?
Well, it was very interesting because we went to a big base camp for the 1st Cav Division where I was, which is kind of a rear area sort of thing, and I found that interesting in trying to learn about the war. But then shortly after that, my arrival, I was assigned to the 11th Aviation Group, which is the part of the 1st Cav Division that owns all the airplanes.
Uh-huh.
So then I ended up working on the staff part of the time for the 11th Aviation Group, and I ended up getting to fly some. I found that was a lot of fun. I hadn't really had much of an opportunity to fly. I'd flown a little bit before, but I found that just fascinating and loved to fly, and I wished I'd had the eyes so I could have been a pilot, because when I was going through school, a lot of my friends were able to become pilots there at Oklahoma State, but I wasn't, my eyes weren't good enough so I could do that.
Yeah. When did you first go into combat?
Well, gee, I did a lot of flying where we ended up in combat, doing special missions and that sort of thing. For a while, I was put on something they called I was not a crew member. I was a non-combat crew member. Mm-hmm. I didn't get paid, but I was required to fly. So I did that, and we ran several missions that were quite interesting, dropping out things like what we call CS. That's what the layman calls tear gas, and we'd have 55-gallon drums of that, and we'd drop that from helicopters over some of the lines where the people would try and walk, where the North Vietnamese were trying to infiltrate, so to make it more uncomfortable for them.
Yeah.
And then we also did that some with napalm. So we dropped 55-gallon drums of napalm.
What kind of planes were you flying?
Those happened to be in Chinooks.
Okay.
But then I flew a lot in the smaller Huey aircraft.
Okay.
And we'd put out basically a machine that would throw out 20, 25 grenades that had CS gas in them also, so you could cause problems for the Vietnamese as they were trying to walk. So we did a lot of that sort of exercise.
Yeah. Now this was 1967. What part of Vietnam were you in, and what were the living conditions like?
I was up in what they called the Highlands. We did that. Living conditions, if you're in base camp not too bad, because we had built some barracks with screens and a roof on them and that sort of thing. But when you're out in the field, it's a lot worse because it's rainy a lot of times. I think one of the worst nights I spent was out where it was just pouring rain, and we tried to put a little shelter up. Didn't work very well. Had a couple sandbags around, ended up using one of those as a cushion and a pillow. And in the morning, when I got up, there was another lieutenant there, and he said, "That's the worst night I've ever had in my life." Well, he'd already been there about 9 months and had gone through Ranger School. So I said, I've got to have it made. So it couldn't be any worse than that, although you did a lot of interesting things out there when you go through the villages, walking, seeing what's going on, trying to find out where you are. And sometimes, of course, people want to shoot at you, and they do, and you never know when. I remember one time we were getting ready to depart, and we brought in a Chinook, and a lot of the guys got on a Chinook, but some of us were left on the ground. We were going to depart later in Huey's. And so soon as the Chinook took off full of troops, there was one shot fired by some North Vietnamese on the ground. And sure enough, gave a leg wound to one of the guys that got out. But the good news was his leg wasn't too bad, but it was okay, so he could go home. So everybody on the ground thought, well, okay, not too bad.
Yeah. Now, while you're in the Army, Bill, you do a lot of interesting things. And you worked with Vietnamese villagers at one time, and you worked, I think, did some work or advising. Explain that for us on the farm. And involved pigs, right, or hogs?
Yeah, that's a terrible story. They staff off, as the staff guy, somebody had to have the job of doing some civil work, going to Vietnamese villages and seeing how they're doing. And there were people who were trained in civil affairs, but I was not. That we didn't have anybody who had been trained in civil affairs. And so then I drew the job, I was assigned the job to periodically go out and visit a village, because they had been given some pigs by some Americans. Mm-hmm. And they were to raise the pigs, and the idea was to make them have a better life. Mm-hmm. So periodically I would have to go out and inspect and see how they were doing. Just because I was from Oklahoma, some major thought that
you knew about pigs, right?
Had to know about pigs, and I certainly didn't. If it had been cattle, it might have been a little different, but that wasn't the case.
Right. But you learned a few things, probably, right?
Well, I went out there and I learned how to write reports, too.
Bill, I want you to tell us now about the battle or combat action that led you to receiving your first Bronze Star with a V.
Oh, that was during the Tet Offensive, which some people may recall. I had an infantry company, and we were guarding an airfield. And that night, the North Vietnamese started to infiltrate around the airfield. So they took us under fire, so we returned fire. And some of the North Vietnamese got through the wire. So we had this huge airfield where we were trying to protect everybody. So then we had to try and get the North Vietnamese out. So then we had to shoot them at the night. And then when daylight came up, we still had a few that had survived. So we had to go track them down. And it was a very interesting night. It was pretty lengthy. That one night in that engagement, I had 11 men killed. Oh. And of course, I was wounded. There were some others that were wounded, but we must have had about 30 or more North Vietnamese that were killed that night. Mm-hmm. So that, and up to that time, there hasn't been much action in that particular area around the airfield. So it was a surprise, and that was the intent that we had. Mm-hmm.
Now, you mentioned you received, you were wounded during this battle and received the Purple Heart. Where were you wounded, and how severe was it?
I was shot in the shoulder. It was not severe at all. I was very fortunate in that regard, because that didn't require much. That's like the second time I was wounded, which was my second tour.
Right.
Again, wasn't a severe wound. That required 14 stitches. And so you go back to work the next day, sort of thing. Mm-hmm.
Bill, I always like to talk with our combat veterans about how you deal with the stress of combat. What goes through your mind when you know the enemy is shooting at you, trying to kill you? What goes through your mind?
Well, it really depends on the time in the event. Sometimes you're very concerned and you're scared because you don't know what's going on.
That's natural, though, isn't it, Bill?
Yeah. And then at other times, I know what's going on. We're in charge. We can get this stuff cleaned up, and so it really varies from time to time. So sometimes you just don't know what's going to happen. You're quite concerned. You're quite scared. One time in my second tour, when I was with the 11th Cavalry Regiment, we had armored vehicles. I had some infantrymen accompanying us. And so we set up for the night. The infantry had dug their foxholes around our vehicles, and it had only been dark for about an hour or two, and another one of the armored platoons started receiving fire. And so I got a notice that I needed to go take my troop and go over and support them. Mm-hmm. Here it was dark, didn't know, we hadn't been in that area before, but I said, well, we've got to go. And the poor infantrymen that had dug their foxholes came right over, a couple of them, and hung on the edge of the vehicle and says, you can't leave us here, you can't leave us. Not worry, you just stay here, we'll be back. Yeah. So they were a lot more scared than I was. It was one of those cases, but yeah, nevertheless, I was not looking forward to it.
Yeah, and you're always, as a lieutenant, you're always concerned about the men under you. And that's one of the things you have to always be concerned about, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, one of the times where I remember very clearly where I was just quite frightened as to what was going to go on. We had a big combat action at Thanksgiving, and it went on for 2 days, so we didn't get any hot meals. Normally at Thanksgiving, they try and bring out hot Thanksgiving meals, turkey and so forth, yeah. But we didn't get any. So because we were in that action, the decision was made at Christmas time, we could go and secure regimental headquarters with my troop, and that way we'd get a nice meal and I could maintain my vehicles. So we did that. We were there and had taken several vehicles apart, so I had about half of my troop ready because everybody, the engines were out and that sort of thing. Yeah. And I got a call that said, we have a report of a North Vietnamese regiment digging in at such and such a location. I want you to go find them. I had half a cavalry troop, and because some of the vehicles couldn't go, so off we went. And you talk about, we are going down this road trying to find an entire regiment, and fortunately, after about a half an hour, we looked and looked where they were supposed to be. We couldn't find them. So then we turned around and went back, and at that time, one of the vehicles with me was the tank, and the tanks had a big, huge searchlight on, so we put that on so you could kind of watch the sides of the road as we went back. But that was the time where, I didn't want to be in that battle, that was the one I really wished I were some other place.
Now, you finished your first tour and had an interesting job back in the States, riot control. Explain what you did, Bill.
Well, that was part of the 6th Cavalry Regiment. We were at Fort Meade, Maryland, and I commanded headquarters troop for the regiment. So at that time, there was a lot of adverse publicity on the Vietnam War. A lot of people were upset. People were complaining about the war and so forth. There was concerns that people could, American citizens could go into Washington, D.C. and complain about the war, cause riots and that sort of thing. So our job was to go down to Washington, D.C. if something should happen. And if the Capitol gets surrounded and that sort of thing, right. Other than bringing in the 82nd Airborne, you just put the 6th Cav on the road, and in a half an hour, you're down there. Yeah. So we had that duty. And that was very interesting because we'd also have to get out and practice riot control so the guys would know what to do. And in some cases, we still had World War II wooden barracks, and sometimes those would be set on fire while we were practicing marching out to control the troops. So they'd be used to having fires, buildings on fire if necessary.
Did you have any incidents where you did have to go, some of the troops have to go in?
Not while I was there. After I was wounded, during my second tour, I went back to Walter Reed there in the Washington area, and then was able to stay at home. And one time, we were in our automobile going downtown Washington, and sure enough, there was the 6th Cav there, and so I stopped at a traffic light, and there were some of the guys that used to work for me right there. And there wasn't any significant issues at the time. These troops had just been called out to make sure that if riots had occurred, we'd be there.
Yeah, yeah.
So I didn't have to do that, but the guys did.
Yeah. Were you ever personally, as you mentioned, a period of time that we had a lot of protests in our country, and going through airports, if you had your uniform on, were you ever assaulted or spit on or anything like that?
No, very interestingly not. I never had a problem of that type at all. I know some people did, but I never did.
Mm-hmm. Bill, it wasn't long before you were back in Vietnam. Did you volunteer for your second tour as well?
No, they just told me it was time to go.
Needed you back in Nam, right?
That's right, yeah.
So tell us about the combat action in which you would receive your second Bronze Star Medal with B device, and it was 1969, correct?
Yeah, I had this cavalry troop, and we got into a lot of different actions. One of them I mentioned earlier was around Thanksgiving, where we fought for 2 days. And there was, when we were doing that, we also had helicopters in the air controlling artillery fire, because we had a lot of jungle trees around us. There were openings and then there'd be jungles, so it was very hard for me to call in artillery or others because we couldn't see where the North Vietnamese were, but the guys in the helicopter could. Mm-hmm. So they would do that. And then we also ended up calling in aircraft. So we'd turn off the artillery when the Air Force fighters would show up, and they would try and injure the North Vietnamese, shoot them up. And that day, we ended up having half of all the fighter missions in Vietnam in that battle. And it was quite extensive, and we had to maneuver around, and we're finally successful in getting rid of the enemy. They had machine guns with anti-aircraft sights on them and that sort of thing, so they were well armed, but we were able to get through that.
Was this in the same area that you were, on your first tour?
No, this was in a different area, somewhat near the Cambodian border.
Uh-huh.
And we had another very interesting incident because these were going on all the time. Within a few weeks, the squadron commander, lieutenant colonel, like a battalion commander, told me to go out and cross this river and see what I could find on the other side. And when I got there, very difficult to see how you're going to get across. The sides were very straight down because when it rained hard, the water had come down this river and torn off all the dirt on the sides, and there was rocks down in the bottom. Mm. And I had an armored launched vehicle bridge, something that would put out itself and you could drive a tank across it, but it can only reach a little more than 60 feet. Mm. And it turns out the river at that point where we were trying to cross, because has potential of something on the other side, was about 70 feet. So I couldn't use my bridge to get across. But then I used shape charges and Bangalore torpedoes, because I'd put shape charges in to blow holes in the ground and then put Bangalore torpedoes in it and then blow them up. And that way the sides would collapse. So finally we got a way to drive clear down to the bottom of the river, which had rocks on it, and we could drive across and get on the other side. And sure enough, as soon as we got there were the North Vietnamese waiting. Mm. But that was an interesting battle because we just rolled right through and rolled grenades into their bunkers.
A lot of ingenuity involved in that, Bill.
Well, when the colonel got hold of me after it was all over, he said, "You're the 3rd Troop Commander I've sent up there," and the other 2 said they couldn't do anything.
Got the job done.
Yeah.
Now, you've already mentioned, that your second tour was cut short because of you were severely wounded. I think you mentioned that you're 14 months you stayed in the hospital?
No, I was just in the hospital for 8 months.
8 months, okay.
8 months at Walter Reed.
Where were you wounded this time? And I think you're a disabled veteran now, of course.
Yeah, I was kneeling down on top of an armored vehicle like you were going to peer around the corner if you were going to hide from somebody and peer around the corner.
Right.
And so I was going to hop down, but I had to get get down on my hands and knees to see what was going on, and grenades went off behind me, so that blew me off of the vehicle and flipped me over. So when I landed on the ground, it broke both legs, and I had then grenade fragments in me, and ultimately both legs were broken. One was an open fracture, so you could see the bone, and on my arm I had one arm that was broken also. So that's how I was injured the first time, and was able to get medevaced back.
Would you go, they send you to Saigon or Da Nang or where?
No, well, they
At
did
first.
some operations right there in the field about,
I see.
I guess, 20-minute flight away. And then I went to Saigon, and I was in Saigon for 2 weeks or so. And then they sent me to Japan for at least a week, maybe a little bit more, maybe 10 days. And then from there, came back to the United States, where I ended up in Walter Reed.
Walter Reed, and you said 8 months was the thing.
Yeah.
Do you have any lingering effects even to this day, Bill, from the injuries?
Yeah, some, but they're not significant. I still have metal fragments in me, so I can't have a CAT scan, for example. It's like shotgun pellets all through me.
Yeah.
And some of the nerve injuries of my hands, I cannot feel well in some cases, things like that. I've got a metal plate in my leg, but they're not things that are significant. I still get out and I ride my bicycle. I can ride, typically, recently, a lot of 9 miles a day, although sometimes I'll ride 12 miles a day, so I'm not in bad shape.
Right. Yeah.
I just have limits on some of the things I can do.
Yeah. I know you were healing when you were healing from your wounds, but there was a period of was there a period of mental adjustment for you coming back from the war? A lot of combat veterans, Bill, will say it changes your life, your outlook on things. How did it change your life after being severely wounded and being in the war, serving twice, 2 tours?
Interestingly enough, it didn't affect me at all, because I remember when they loaded me on the helicopter to go right there where I'd been injured and was going to take me to the field hospital. The only thing I could think of is, I'm going home, I want to see my wife and my little baby.
Yeah.
And so I had a positive attitude
Right.
of that.
Yeah. And when you're flying back from, say, Saigon, where did you go? Was it directly like to California and fly on to Washington in a medical aircraft, you might say? Or how
Well, I had a
did
medical,
they get you back in the
I had a
country?
medical aircraft in Japan that I loaded
Japan,
on.
okay, yeah.
So we're leaving Japan, going to the States, and we were supposed to go up to Washington State. No, we were supposed to go to Alaska. And we went up to Alaska and circled, and they couldn't land. So then they said, well, we'll go to Washington State. So we went into Washington State, and I was on a stretcher. They have these big buses, and they'll hold stretchers. So just took us off for a day. We spent the night. And then the next day took us into Illinois, where the Air Force has a huge hospital, and that's kind of a sorting place. Most of the disabled people or people that have to go to hospitals go to this site in the middle of Illinois. And then they're sorted out, and so you spend the night, and then the next day they put you on, everybody who's going to go to Washington, D.C. gets on another plane. So it just took a few days.
Yeah, yeah. What was Walter Reed like? They take good care of you there? And
Oh yeah, it was good. And I was on a ward where everybody else had orthopedic issues. And I remember one time there was discussion around the table of about 12 guys who had a total of like 6 good legs between the 12 guys or something. So, but we got along fine.
you had a lot of friends there in the hospital, I'm sure.
Well, a lot of acquaintances, and some of the guys had really been badly hurt, and others not too bad. But it was interesting to see how everybody got along. And interesting enough, in Walter Reed also, if you tell the nurse, I'd like a beer, she'd actually go get you one.
Great.
So that was not too bad.
That was good service.
Yes,
Yeah.
it was.
Yeah, yeah. That would help heal you much faster, I'm sure.
Yeah, yeah.
Or you would think that in your mind. How do you feel when people call you a hero, when they hear about or read about what you did in combat? How does that make you feel, Bill?
I think a lot of people just do what, and I was one, just do what you're supposed to do. And so I don't consider myself a hero. I think that people, for lack of a better term, appreciate that you served and went through, and after I recovered from everything, I didn't leave the military. I stayed in the military. I wanted to stay in for 20 years, just like my father had stayed in for 20 years. So I don't consider myself a hero. I was just doing what I had signed up to do.
And trained to do.
Yep.
Yeah, yeah. Tell us about some of your assignments after you got out of the hospital. You had quite a tour for the next, how many years? It's been like 17, 18 years there, right?
Yeah, well, I had the advantage of a choice of assignments, and so I wanted to go to Fort Knox and either teach tank gunnery or teach in what they called the command and staff department. So I got my first choice, and I went to tank gunnery. So I was able to go out and teach classes. It was very nice. I enjoyed that very much for a year, and I was teaching at the time mainly lieutenants that were just going through the course, although for some classes we had some senior sergeants who'd come in because we were teaching advanced things on how would you fire a tank indirect, as like you had to do during the Korean War, in an indirect fire role. So you're using a tank like an artillery piece, which is not normally used. So we were limited on who could take those courses, but it was a lot of fun to do that. Very interesting, and I did that for 1 year. Also, after that, then because I had an engineering degree, they had a position at the weapons department where I was, where you could evaluate other things that might come into the Army community in the way of firearms. So pistols, are you going to try and change some of the ammunition and that sort of thing? And so that was very nice to do that work for a year after having taught for a year.
Yeah. So, but you got to, were you back in Germany some more? Or
No, well then, after Fort Knox, I went to get my master's degree in engineering. The Army sent me to Oklahoma State.
Okay.
They wanted me to study automotive engineering, and so I studied all that sort of thing. So when I was finished with that, I eventually ended up doing other things, but I went to Fort Belvoir, where there was a lot of work going on, and I became a product manager. It was at that time. That was a brand new job, and we were trying to do stuff with tanks, and I was just given a bundle of money and an assignment, and worked there for some time.
You were the first manager of the M1A1.
That was later.
Later.
That was
okay,
later.
Yeah.
So I did this research and development job, and then after I completed that, went back over to Germany, and sure enough, the regiment I was with was the 11th Cavalry, the one I'd served with in Vietnam, and we were on the east-west German border, so we'd guard the West Germany, as it was at that time, from the Soviet forces. So that was our main job, to do that.
Yeah. And it was after this now that you became the first manager of the M1A1 project?
Yes, when I finished that, then went to school, and then after that was assigned to Detroit, and it became at the time there was a two-star general who was running all the armor development activities, and so when I walked in, he just told me that there's a lot of drawings and concepts and things we've been talking about trying to do kind of scattered around the floor. So you get in an office, and we get you some people, and then we want you to put all this stuff together and start making it happen. So that was, the office I was in had just started to produce the M1 tank, which had the older gun on it, but the M1A1 was to have a newer, better gun, and that was the main job, although we also added new armor and a few other additional features, better sights and so forth. So when I got there, that's what my job was, and I had a major working for me and some civilians, and we just got all that together, got it assembled, had a contract with Chrysler, and started to develop all these things, do the drawings, go out and test pieces, and that sort of thing.
You must have done a pretty good job, Bill, because you developed this, what, 5 or 6 years, something like that?
Yeah, I had it for 2.5 years, and then I had to go to another assignment, and so I was replaced by a colonel who was there, and he had it for 2.5 years. So then in 5 years, from the time I was told to get it started, we rolled the first tank out. And I had just retired at that time, so I got invited to the ceremony with the Chief of Staff of the Army and everybody.
Well, you're a big part of it, yeah.
Yeah, so that was quite nice to see what could be done in 5 years from start to finish. And it's very difficult to get some of those things done, but it was a matter of paying attention to detail, and just go make it happen. Yeah. And the other fellow had the same attitude I did, is we're just going to go make it happen.
Getting the job done.
Yep.
Bill, what was the deciding factor for you to leave the service after 20 years?
When I got to about year 18, I said, well, you can either stay for 20, which is your first chance to retire, or you can stay for 30. And the way things were going for promotions, I was a lieutenant colonel. The promotions to colonel were going very slow at that time, because the war, we'd had so many people that if you were selected for colonel, it was taking 2 years after you were selected to actually get promoted. And the year just before, the list that they went over of eligible lieutenant colonels took 2 years. So I said, well, at the most, then maybe I'll know in 2 years, and if I make it, I got to wait another 2. Why don't I just quit and use my engineering degree, because I knew a lot of people in industry, and I think I can make a lot more money and have a lot more fun, because I'll have more control over it. And that's exactly what I did. Was as soon as 20 rolled around, I was able to get out, and 2 or 3 different corporate vice presidents or presidents came to me and said, I hear you're leaving. May I have a copy of your resume? Good. So I'm always in favor of that sort of thing.
Worked out well for you.
So it worked out well, and I ended up working for Honeywell in Minneapolis for 6 years, and then came down to Huntsville. There was another opening down here, and somebody wanted to hire me, so I came down and had a good time.
Good. Bill, do you often wonder, would you do it all over again? Thinking back in your life in the military, would you do it all over again? Same thing?
I think some of the details might be different, but in general, the concept is yes. You know, on this day, on that instance, I think I might do something different, but as a general rule, sure.
I'm sure you formed lasting friendships, and we touched on that a little bit earlier. You still stay in contact with a lot of your friends that you made during your military career and corporate career?
Some of them, in both in the military and in the corporate world. So it's a mixed bag, but yes, we get together. I've got some friends here. We get together periodically, go out with several of them, talk with them, and some that I've been with in the Army before have limited contact, but some of them I do know, and we exchange Christmas cards or get-togethers. And one of the fellows that I knew some time ago, I just spoke to over the phone about maybe 3 months ago, so we reestablished contact. So yes.
Yeah. Now, at one point, you formed your own company after working with Honeywell, I believe it was, and
well, after I'd been here also.
You're right. After you've been, yeah. Now, tell us about that experience, forming your own company. What made you make that decision?
Well, as I had learned some about how to write, because a lot of engineers cannot write very well, and industry has to make these big proposals. Right. If you're going to chase several $1 million, 100 million, 400 million, or whatever dollars, you have to write these proposals for the government to evaluate what you're going to do. So you have to describe what your approach is, how you're going to manage it, how much money it's going to take, and so forth. So there's 2 challenges that. One is getting all the technical and management details correct, and the other is making it very readable. And a great many engineers, I discovered, cannot write well, so it's not overly readable. They want to spend all their time on the technical aspects.
Right.
But some of the people that evaluate your proposal don't have a very good technical background. And I thought I could do that. And interestingly enough, the way I got started is I had quit a company locally, and a local fella called me and said, I understand that you're available, you quit working. Could you come and work for me for a few days? And I said, when? And he says, how about at 1 o'clock today? And so I went over there, and we had a good time. I solved his problems. So the next week, one of his buddies who ran a different company called me and did the same thing, only I worked for about a week and a half with him. And I said, this is pretty good. I think I'll start doing this for a living.
Yeah.
And then after a while, I had such a demand that some of my friends who were also retired military, I took them on, and at one time I had as many as 8 people.
Really? Okay.
And so we could go out and do work, and if there's no work for a couple of weeks, I get a vacation. But the most I ever did, I think, in one night, one day, I was with a big company working with the president. We were trying to finish this proposal, and we sat there for 23 hours straight. Wow. But we won it.
It was all worth it, wasn't it?
It certainly was, and besides, they're paying me by the hour.
Yeah. What was your company called?
Emerson Consulting.
Okay, and you were in Research Park here in town, Huntsville?
Yeah, and usually I'd go to the companies where we were working because I had to discuss things with the engineers, the cost people, what they were doing, how they did things. Mm-hmm. So normally we'd go and we'd take our own computers, although some companies wanted me to use, they would supply their computers so we wouldn't have to bring our own, yeah, because they were concerned about information getting in and out. But normally that was the best way to work it, is to go to the company and sit down with them and spend time.
So it came to a point that you wanted to retire yourself and sell the company, and that time came, right? I mean, what is this, a few years ago? I think you...
Yeah, I guess I really quit just a few years back because I wanted to travel.
Sure.
I'd saved some money.
Life, yeah.
And so my wife and I wanted to go see Europe, and we've just gone a lot of places, so we've gone to a lot of different countries.
Good, that's good. Bill, I want you to tell us about your family. And do you have grandkids? I understand you have 2, you and your wife have 2 children.
We have 2 children. We have a daughter who lives in England, and we have a son in Minnesota.
Uh-huh.
Our son has an interesting life. He has his own computer firm where he supports a lot of small and medium companies, and in some cases, some of the companies are really pretty good sized. Mm-hmm. So he does that, and then he's also a minister, because after he got his degree in computer science, I kept asking him, why don't you go back and get your master's degree? I'll pay for it.
Yeah.
So one time when I told him that, he said, how much longer is this going to be available? And I said, this is the last year. He said, if I wanted to go to seminary, would you pay for that? And I said, well, if that's what you want to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
So he also has a non-denominational church in the Minneapolis area. Mm-hmm. And so he does that on the weekends and then does the computer work during the week. And my daughter went over to England over 25 years ago, and she was going to stay for 6 months. She's still there, of course.
Yeah, good. Okay, Bill, now you've had a couple of books published, or more than a couple, I believe, on Army artifacts. Tell us about your interest in that.
Yes, I also collected military insignias. I started that as a child, collecting shoulder patches, and when I was in the 3rd grade, I'd sew them on a jacket, and then in the 4th grade and so forth. So I decided that there ought to be some books telling you about these insignias, the little collar insignias you might put on, or a cap insignia or sergeant stripe. And it turns out at that time there weren't any books, so I decided that I needed to do some of that. So my first book was on sergeant chevrons, and it covered the whole history of U.S. Army sergeant chevrons from the War of 1812 up to then present time. And I was very fortunate that Smithsonian asked if they could publish that because I knew the people there. So they published that, and it was very nice. This was years ago, back when money was worth a little more, and a copy of the book then cost $50, which was good money at that time. And they ran 2,500 copies, which is a pretty good number for a scholarly press, and they all sold, and it went pretty quick.
Fantastic, yeah.
And then after that, I did a book on the collar and cap insignia and uniforms of the U.S. Army, and the University of Oklahoma published that. It has several thousand photographs in it. It's on print size. The page sizes are 9 by 12, and it has almost 1,000 pages in it. It is a big doorstop. But that's now a standard reference work that a lot of the museum curators in the military community use.
Fantastic, yeah.
And then that was followed by one, the same, only it was about 1/3 as thick, that again, University of Oklahoma Press published. And that was on the Army Shooting Awards. So all the medals, marksmanship, what you had to do to get them, and that sort of thing. And so it goes through the history of all those starting in the 19th century up to the time that was published.
Now, you also write, is it a quarterly article that you're writing?
Oh, I do a lot of magazine articles. One of them for a collector's journal called the Trading Post. I do a quarterly, every quarter, I do at least 4 pages, maybe 5, and it has the text describing something that a lot of the people don't know about, and I include pictures with it. And I've done that now. I've done for over 20 years. So that's what, 20, so that's over 80 articles I've done just for that magazine and for several other collectors or scholarly journals. I continue to do those.
Keeps you occupied, you know, working around the house, doing honeybee projects and that sort of thing. So, you know, you're occupied, right, Bill?
Oh, still am. You betcha.
Bill, I want to mention that, you know, a lot of young people may be watching this interview, and for those who may be considering a career in the military, what advice would you give those young people?
I think the military provides a great career, and you need to determine several things. Which branch of service do you want to go into? Consider then in that branch what you might like to do. Would you like to be an engineer, for example? Well, that engineers in the Army sense may build roads or bridges. Or there's another group of engineers in the Army that they destroy those things. So you could be a lawyer and go into the military to do that. So whatever interest you have, you could do that. You could go into the Navy or the Marine Corps or the Air Force because they do different activities. They have lots of different areas, and you can get very good training. The Army sent me back for my master's degree. I was able to do a lot of schooling. I also went to short courses that were very good. Those are opportunities. And the best is, when you're finished, you don't have to wait until you're 65 to get your retirements. So you can also get retired. So when I was having my own business here, I was also drawing military retired pay. And that's what allowed my wife and I to travel as we desired.
Exactly. Well, the military is not for everyone, but I think all young people should at least look at it. Check it out. You know, it may fit them, it may not, that sort of thing. So.
I agree completely. It's consider what you might be able to do, and would you like it? And you can talk to some people that have done that.
You were inducted into the Hall of Heroes in 1996, Bill. What was the experience like, and what did it mean to you?
Well, it was most interesting because that's put on when there's a parade, and so you get to stand up there as everybody marches by, which was quite interesting. And I thought it was very nice to be recognized for the service that I had performed.
Right. Yeah. Bill, I want to thank you. This has been an extremely interesting interview, and I want to thank you for participating in our oral history interview series and allowing us to preserve your military experience for the people of this community. And thank you, sir, for your service to our country. We appreciate it very much.
Well, I thank you for the opportunity and the time you spent with me.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Now, if you'd like more information regarding this interview or any interview in our Military Heritage series, please contact the Madison County Military Heritage Commission website at mcmhc.us. I'm Tom Kinnemer. Thank you for being with us.